Gears of War. There was a time when you needed to see this showcase of epic proportions. Originally developed for the Xbox 360 and released in 2006, nearly 20 years ago, Gears of War took the video game industry by storm, and also made my launch Xbox 360 get the red ring of death because the game was just that epic. Not only was this a huge technical showcase at the time, but its game design also influenced future games to come in more ways than you may think. Sup everybody, Ambro here. Sorry for the inconsistency in posting. I like playing games and sometimes I get so immersed and sucked in I simply don't go back to writing my scripts. If I would just stop being lazy and start vetting for an editor, well, that would be a different story. But that would force me to stop playing all these amazing games we have right now, so it looks like a problem for tomorrow. So in this video, let's take a retrospective peek at how Gears of War Reloaded stacks up in 2025 and how its legacy has shaped modern gaming in more ways than one. Anyways, before we get started, be sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell to get instant notifications on when the next video drops. We are so close to 1,000 subs, and this small creator appreciates every bit of love. To start this video, we have to take the way back and travel back to 2006, almost 20 years ago. Just an FYI, all of the footage I'm showing in this video is my own capture, either directly from my gaming PC or my Xbox Series X. Credit where credit is due. Xbox and Microsoft have preserved the original Gears of War incredibly well. This footage, for example, I captured within the last week from my Xbox Series X, and it even cleans up the performance issues that the OG Xbox 360 had. Console manufacturers are kinda going through a thing right now with physical media and game preservation, so again, kudos to Xbox and Microsoft for keeping the original Gears of War alive and well. Let's look at some of the noteworthy games released in 2006. You had Elder Scrolls Oblivion, the original, not the remaster, that just released, Bully, Guitar Hero 2, Marvel Ultimate Alliance, Dead Rising, Call of Duty 3, Hitman Blood Money, and so much more. And of course, the game we're here to talk about, Gears of War. Needless to say, 2006 was a stacked year for games, with Halo 3 coming out only a year later. But one thing you don't see a lot on that list of games are cover-based shooters. That's because they just weren't that popular back then. A lot of people also think Gears of War was the first cover-based shooter. While it wasn't the first cover-based shooter, it did popularize it to the masses. First game to do cover-based shooting from my knowledge is Killswitch from 2003. Killswitch really nailed the dual analog stick camera movement that Gears and other games would go on to adopt and popularize. So not only did Cliff Bleszinski and Epic Games craft the road-running, hunched-over, macho man, apocalyptic shooting game we all know and love, but the cover mechanics are still so crispy and nice to this day. Reloaded's cover system isn't quite as robust and refined as it is in Gears 5, for example, but it still holds up incredibly well almost 20 years later. You press A on your controller and you instantly snap into cover. It still feels as good today as it did back then. And many other games and franchises have gone on to learn from Gears and implement their own cover systems or similar ones. For example, some games that really mirror how the Gears cover systems work today are the Division franchise from Ubisoft, Outriders from People Can Fly, and the Mass Effect trilogy, specifically ME2 and ME3. They're all functional, but not quite as snappy and as satisfying as Gears. Other games have taken this step further and created contextual cover systems where your character ducks when behind cover and you don't need to press anything. Games like Uncharted do this. Now, one thing that Gears of War did do first to my knowledge is the active reload system. Modern-day indie games like Enter the Gungeon, AAA multiplayer games like Star Wars Battlefront, and even big AAA single-player games like Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy have adopted a form of the active reload system all these years later. It shows the impact that that game mechanic has had on the industry at large. Now, what Gears of War also did well was having a great sense of pacing. The game being broken up into different acts with unique enemies and weapons being drip-fed to you as you progress makes it feel real and meaningful. I remember the first time I picked up a torque bow and was just in awe of how cool and creative this weapon was. I had never seen anything like that. People like to tease Sony and PlayStation for their PS4 era of games, where everything started to feel kind of like a sad dad walking simulator with a lot of dialogue happening in between all the different sections of the game, but let's be real, Gears of War did this back in 2006, and it still tells a great story. In fact, this is inherently not a bad way to tell stories. But obviously, it's not to the same degree as something like God of War 2018 or The Last of Us Part 2. But the similarities are rather striking. Now, don't get me wrong, games like System Shock 2 also did something similar to this back in the 90s, with most of its storytelling being told via collectible audio logs, but I digress. Now, before we move on to the next section, I did want to touch on the artistic uplift Gears Reloaded and Ultimate Edition received before that, because this was a point of contention for Gears Ultimate Edition, and I'm sad to report here that this was not addressed in the new Reloaded Edition. What am I talking about? Well, gather around, children. Long ago in the original Gears of War, not only did it not have the entire section where you fight a Brumac on foot, but the Emulsion Factory also looked like this. Now, don't get me wrong, the updated assets, lighting, shadowing, and other graphical features and uplifts applied to this version of Gears deserve praise, especially on the performance front. But artists create these things with visual intent for a reason. I can't tell you how amazing it is to see Gears of War all these years later running at basically 4K 60 FPS with HDR, and I just got a new LG TV, and the little kid inside me who used to turn to Channel 3 to play games is just so happy. But, and this is a big but, but no laughs, only video. And to be clear, I have no problems with any other section of the game. I mean, there's a few blurry textures here or there, but I can forgive that. What I can't forgive is why is this level so bright? Why does the rain look like that? Did the Ultimate Edition devs even look at the original game? This part has definitely bothered me, and it's a tad upsetting that it wasn't addressed here. It by no means breaks the game or makes it unplayable, but the vibe is just way different. And yeah, that may be due to the fact that I'm now 30 plus years old with a mortgage and bills to pay, but still, this level just doesn't carry on the horror element that the original game captured so well here. Also, this artistic change really pissed me off. It's way too bright and there's not enough krill. I don't know what drove them to make these changes. I could go on about this, but we should just move on to the actual gameplay section before I get pissed. Not everything has aged totally gracefully, and good game mechanics back in 2006 might be considered too stripped back today. Keep in mind that Gears of War was developed for the Xbox 360, which by today's standards is slow hardware. However, the game is only being sold for $40 US as well, so that does play a factor here. For the technically inept among us, game design is limited by the hardware of the target platform, which in this case of Gears of War was the Xbox 360. It's pretty blatant to see if you observe the AI in the game. Sometimes locusts will just jog towards you with no intent to find cover. Others will just not be protected by cover at all, with huge parts of their body just sticking out. Boomers, no, not those boomers. These ones in particular are quite dumb. A lot of drones will just stay peeked up out of cover without shooting. And again, keep in mind that this game was designed for much older hardware, so the enemy AI just simply cannot be as complex as some games that you might see today, although, truth be told, enemy AI in games today still hasn't taken that generational leap that I've been hoping to see for, frankly, a few generations now. But either way, one thing that is nice about the game is that there are multiple difficulty levels, although all this really does is increase the amount of damage that you take and increase the amount needed to kill locusts. This is common practice, but at least there are difficulty-specific achievements for you to unlock if that kind of thing is your jam. This is how games used to have extra content in games. You were forced to learn the levels inside and out. Check all the nooks and crannies, figure out where the enemy spawns were, and where the trigger points are. That's how video games used to be, because we were only able to afford 1 or 2 games at a time. Not like today with things like Game Pass, where there are literally more games available than I have time to play. It's both a game of its time and a good, but not great, modern release. All of that being said, the sound design and general gameplay loop is still great. Its epic soundtrack, the one-liners after getting kills, the sound of a Gnasher one-shotting a drone, or the headshot sound of a long shot, or just the carnage of a Lancer chainsaw. The encounters themselves are also not too long, which I actually really like, because in a lot of modern games with stats and RPG systems, which is my favorite genre of games, sometimes bosses and mob fights just get dragged out because some weird C-suite executive said somewhere that the longer the game is and the less enemies die, the more value it brings to the player. Yeah, this is just not true. If you look at publishers like Ubisoft, which, to their credit until recently, have always pumped their portfolio of game franchises with open world bloat. Most of their games, for a period of time, felt like a checklist game. And so many other open world titles took this approach as well. It worked for some titles, and it was just way too bloated for others. Now, 2025 has been a great year for games that fight that narrative, that more time played equals more value to the player. To be honest, this question in general is just subjective, because games like Expedition 33, Doom the Dark Ages, Split Fiction, Avowed, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, South of Midnight, Mafia the Old Country, and more games are really pushing for quality over quantity, telling meaningful, memorable stories with relatable characters.
I used to be old, but now he's old.
You know, being actual art. You're not just consuming because you spend money on a product and you feel bad about it. You're learning, you're feeling, you're crying, you're growing with these characters. You're making decisions for them in their party. That's what these stories are all about. Or you're the Doomslayer and you're just slaying demons. And let's keep in mind, games are art. Art deserves to be preserved. Yes, even the bloated, soulless Ubisoft games. And in fairness to Ubisoft, they've been shaking things up. The recent Prince of Persia side-scrollers, Star Wars Outlaws, and Avatar have been fantastic efforts from them. But back to Gears. Gears Reloaded on a single playthrough will get you like 10 to 12 hours on an easier difficulty, maybe 15 on Hardcore or Nightmare if you really take your time, and Nightmare difficulty is only unlocked after you beat the campaign once. I did bring this up before, but I want to quickly dedicate a small section to it and quickly touch on the horror element of Gears Reloaded because this is relevant. The original Gears of War had a great horror element to the game. The jump scares, the insanely cool design of all the variants of locusts. I mean, look at the Theron Guard or the Berserker. So freaking cool. Horror games have always been popular, and the explosion of Resident Evil as a franchise, as well as all the RE spin-offs, show the intergenerational influence that franchise has had on the industry. Gears of War 1 straddled the fine line between horror and action, and it resulted in the epic game we're talking about today. If I'm being honest though, it doesn't feel like a horror game meant to scare you. It feels like an action game in an already scary setting. Sarah, the planet that this all takes place on, is such a well-realized setting that the overarching doomerism type of theme that the game has felt more meaningful and impactful as a result. It's just why the game hits so hard. And speaking of the campaign hitting hard, replayability is another thing Gears Reloaded has today, and even the original Gears had back in the day. One of my favorite features is the split screen or the online co-op of the campaign. Gears of War released back in a time when this was a popular feature, unlike today's games. Don't get me wrong, gaming today with my friends across the world via a simple Discord call is nothing short of magical. But the novelty of split screen back then, blocking out a whole weekend, blinds closed, and Mountain Dew loaded, there's really just nothing else like it. If you have the opportunity to do that with a friend today, do it. A lot of games that try to do co-op also do not do it as seamlessly as Gears. Have you tried to play with a friend in Monster Hunter Wilds? I've never opened up so many freaking menus just to play with a friend. There was also a period of time where AAA co-op games in general just kind of stopped being made, so it's really great to see them having this as an option. This is a really good segue into the next section, which is to briefly discuss the multiplayer, which is almost oversimplified by today's standards. Games like Call of Duty and Apex Legends have made loadouts and just took the fun out of customization. It's just become so homogenous that it just seems like everyone's trying to copy the meta after every update, rushing through battle passes for the grind instead of just playing the game for fun. You will see videos of grown men raging because of an update that quote-unquote ruined the meta that doesn't even sound like fun to me, but to each their own. I can't relate. The game does have skins and cosmetics to unlock, but they are not behind a battle pass or a paywall. You just level up and play the game, and that's the way it should be, in my honest opinion. So, to wrap it up here, Gears of War Reloaded. It feels like both a product of its time and somehow a refreshing display of what a focused development process with a strong conviction in your artistic intent looks like. Even 20 years later, Gears of War's gameplay still holds up very well. Its storytelling is still good enough, and the characters and the world of Sarah stand out amongst the crowd. But that's going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell to get allegedly instant notifications on when the next video drops. Sound off down in the comments. What are your thoughts on Gears Reloaded? Were you a PlayStation guy who tried it for the first time, or are you a longtime fan who came back for some more carnage? Again, sorry for the inconsistency in the channel. I'm going through the process of finding an editor who can take the load off my hands, but until then, this is Ambro, keeping you plugged into the games that matter. Peace out.